Well, if you've tuned into any of the lamestream media's news recently, you may have noticed that there is non-stop coverage of the Republican primaries. Everywhere you look, there's a story about Santorum or Gingrich or Bachmann or whoever. And really, it has become a reality TV show. This is Bob Tuskin with a Intel Hub News Brief. Recently, I got a chance to chat with Michael Badnarik, the 2004 Libertarian presidential candidate. We talked Ron Paul, we talked our local sheriff's office, and a number of different things. And here is our conversation in which we started off by discussing what he finds to be a distraction as well.
Well, the presidential campaign is designed to be a distraction. The last thing they want to do is talk about issues. The whole thing is like a Shakespeare play. And for the most part, the conclusion has already been predetermined before you sit down in your seat. And anybody who is surprised that Hamlet gets offed at the end, didn't read the script. And, the people that run the banks and, manipulate our money have already decided who they would want. All of the candidates are basically bought and paid for. So in the big scheme of things, it really doesn't matter who wins. And, it's mostly for show. However, this election cycle is different. The economy is finally bad enough where everybody is hurting financially, having difficulty putting food on the table. We've got foreclosure rates that are skyrocketing and people being put out onto the streets. And because people are suffering enough personal pain, they are beginning to get involved. We had the Tea Party develop, that was almost 2 years ago, maybe more. We've got the Oath Keepers, we've got the Occupy Wall Street more recently. I mean, you can't throw a stick without hitting a protest rally. And I saw a statistic that Congress approval rating is at like 9%.
Wow.
9%. The founding fathers had already thrown tea into Boston Harbor and shot and killed people at Lexington and Concord. I mean, this is ridiculous. If you and I had spoken 15 years ago and you told me that Congress was going to pass the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, this homegrown terrorist act, I would have laughed at you and might have even, done I forget what they call it, intervention. I would have done an intervention because I thought you were crazy, that the American people would never tolerate something like the Patriot Act. Well, I was wrong. And I'm not sure how much the American people are willing to tolerate. But we are getting closer and closer to the point where they're not willing to tolerate it anymore. The fact that the mainstream media has credited Ron Paul with coming in third, albeit a very, very close third, is a tribute to just how powerful public opinion has become. I secretly suspect that Ron Paul has actually won the Iowa caucus, and that they've kind of whittled it back to make it look like he only came in third. But the Iowa caucus is non-binding. It doesn't really mean anything politically. But the natives are restless. The American people are tired of the status quo. They don't like the Democrats. They don't like the Republicans. And Ron Paul stands out as the one man who has given a consistent answer for 30 years. I mean, nobody can point at Ron Paul and accuse him of being a flip-flop. In fact, for years they were laughing that Ron Paul was so monotonous in his position. So I think the American people are finally at a point in their lives where they are ready to consider other options, that they are ready to have some legitimate prosperity. And they have come to the realization that the Democrats and Republicans and the status quo are not going to do that. So I think that Ron Paul has a legitimate chance. I mean, at 6 months ago, I would have told you that Ron Paul's a great guy, but that the powers that be would never tolerate that. And I think that the liberty movement is pushing so hard that they may elect Ron Paul into the White House in spite of all of the political corruption in the background.
It would be an absolutely amazing accomplishment to see that people are able to get out there and actually put in a candidate that stands for a lot of great things. But there are people out there that are saying no to Dr. No, and they say, well, we agree with him on many different issues, including his foreign policy, that kind of thing and whatnot. And that's what the lame stream wants to put him down for constantly. I mean, they just have the same talking points when it comes to him still to this day, despite the new surge of coverage that they're giving him. But I think it's very interesting that there are some criticisms that people have that they're liberty minded, but they still say, well, wait, is Ron Paul somebody we want in there? He's a Freemason. He doesn't go all the way with 9/11. People are looking at his connections with Fine, and I mean the list goes on. How would you address some of those criticisms that are holding people back from actually supporting someone who otherwise they would say stands for everything that they want?
Well, first of all, that's the first time I've ever heard uh, Ron Paul accused of being a Freemason. Um, and the idea of not being willing to go all the way on 9/11. I mean, is this the penum, uh, penultimate conspiracy theory that the government was somehow complicit in the World Trade Center collapse? And most people are not politicians. And I mean, I was asked several times during my presidential campaign back in 2004, if I would take an open position. Well, I was a third party candidate. I mean, I was already being ridiculed just because I wasn't, one of the two major parties. Um, there's no possible way that I could have taken a public stand on the World Trade Center bombing in 2004 without being painted as a lunatic. In 2004, there may have been 10% of the population that would even consider such an idea. Now, I think it's almost reversed. I think that 80% of the population suspects that it either was an inside job, could have been an inside job, and a relatively small percentage of the population is still naive enough to think that the official story is gospel truth. So it would be political suicide for Ron Paul to make any public statements, regardless how he felt. I mean,
Yeah.
if he does or does not believe it was an inside job, even discussing it threatens his chances of.
In fact, that's exactly what happened recently. I was on the road and I turned into the lame stream talk radio, and Glenn Beck was on, and they were playing a clip of one of these crazy 9/11 truthers asking Ron Paul why he doesn't come out and go the full way with the story here for the general public, and him simply saying that it was too controversial got them all up in arms, saying, "Oh, well, a guy who doesn't believe this wouldn't say it's too controversial. He would just say Al Qaeda because Al Qaeda did it." So they're already using just him being asked the question and just the slightest in the slightest way dodging it and not completely saying that it's crazy or it's a conspiracy or any of these terms they like to give to people that are asking honest questions. Just in him talking about that created a problem. So I think you're right. I think there's a balance there that needs to take place, and we can't be too hyperly critical of this. We saw the same sort of problem with the Deborah Medina situation.
Exactly. they did an interview with Deborah and deliberately painted her as a wacko. And this is the same kind of high school peer pressure that we tried to outgrow. I mean, you're in, high school, you got the cool clique, and, whatever these kids think is cool, and anybody that disagrees with them, you're just not cool. You don't get to sit at the same lunch table with us. And the mainstream media and the two major parties play the same routine. If you are not singing the song on key, then, well, you're just not one of the cool kids, and we're not gonna let you play in our clique.
Right. Well, that's too bad because again, we need to get something changed. Now, for those though that say the presidential election is not something we should put our energy in, I'm a grassroots kind of activist. I think it needs to start in your own house, in your own community, at your city commission meetings, at your county sheriff's office. That in many ways is going to be our only buffer between us and federal tyranny. The hopes that a presidential candidate is going to be able to reform things to the extent that is really needed might be a bit Pollyannish in some people's opinion. What would you say to that?
Well, you can't ride a bicycle with only one wheel. You can't focus on the county local level and not address all the other things. You have to make a complete frontal assault. You got to, attack at every possible angle, and it's going to require all of us to participate. Now, interesting that you mentioned the sheriff. Most people are unaware that the sheriff is the highest constitutional executive authority in the county. The sheriff has the legitimate authority to throw the federal government out if the federal government is doing anything blatantly unconstitutional or even just unwanted. And on January 30th, my friend Sheriff Mack and I and a number of other speakers are going to be going to Las Vegas, Nevada, and we have the first annual Constitutional Sheriff and Police Officers Association convention. You can find out more at cspoa.org. And we are in the process of inviting 200 sheriffs to Las Vegas. And I'm going to start the day by teaching them about the Bill of Rights and the principles of self-determination. Sheriff Mack will pick up with his Supreme Court victory supporting the 10th Amendment and state power over federal power. And we have several sheriffs from around the country who have already stood up to federal tyranny and have done so successfully. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of this meeting is to basically, verify that the sheriff understands how much power they have in the county, that they understand that they are not doing this alone, that there are already other sheriffs who are out there defending these constitutional principles, and to basically build kind of an ad hoc support group for these sheriffs, so that they will be willing and prepared to help defend us against the federal and even possibly state government.
Well, this is the sort of revolution we need. We need those buffers on the county level to protect us from federal tyranny. And unfortunately, many of the police and sheriff departments are backing down to the federal pressures. I had this same discussion with my local police department. They kept saying, well, if we're given an order to implement martial law, then we have to follow that order, and that there's a hierarchy here, and we have to follow the order of the federal government. Completely ignorant to the true checks and balances created with our system.
Yeah, well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to correct those misunderstandings, and again, there are several sheriffs across the country that have already stood up to this type of tyranny. They've already been successful on their own, and we want to increase their success and their numbers by giving these sheriffs time to talk among themselves and to um, basically gather strength and courage from common understanding.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping up to date on what happens with that because that sounds like a great idea. And if the sheriff's department doesn't work, some people are talking about militias and that kind of thing. Have you looked into that at all?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Well, how many people want to live in a free country or a free state? Well, just about everybody. Well, the Second Amendment doesn't say that, well, if you want a free country, then having a militia is optional, kind of like, picking a color. It says it's necessary. If you want to jump out of an airplane, parachute is absolutely necessary. If you want to make a second skydive, you have to have a parachute. So if you want to have a free country, it is absolutely necessary, mandatory, obligatory that you have an unregulated militia, basically you and I and everybody else, to defend ourselves from the government when
Well,
the government gets out of control.
we've been told by Big Sis, Jenna Napolitano, that these are criminals, that these are terrorists, and that they're not there to protect us, that they're indeed there to come after us all. We have this negative connotation of the militia now. Not I, but most people, I would say, seduced by the lame stream, has this just very gloomy picture of them. Uh, that's pretty troubling that that happens. That they're trying to paint the sovereignty movement. 60 Minutes did a piece on that, and the militias as being homeland terrorists. And I think that's feeding in, unfortunately, in some respects, whether they want to or not, into the fear mongering paradigm that they present.
Well, when someone is guilty of treason, it's not a big surprise that they're willing to lie to you,
Right.
and it's a common human trait to do misdirection, that the person who is guilty of the crime immediately accuses someone else of the same crime. Children do the same thing. No, I didn't break the lamp, Mama. My brother did. And so the only difference is we're supposed to be smart enough not to fall for those kind of lies. So here in Indiana, where I'm at currently, the in this summer the Indiana Supreme Court made a ruling that
Right.
people in Indiana are not allowed to defend themselves against the police, even if the police are kicking down the door at 2 o'clock in the morning without a warrant and actually in commission of a crime. If the police officers are guilty of a crime, you are still not allowed to defend yourself
Wow.
because apparently that violates Indiana state policy. Well, the Indiana Supreme Court can take their state policy and put it where the sun doesn't shine, because anybody kicking down my door at 2 o'clock in the morning is probably not going home again.
Bottom
Nobody
line.
can make it illegal for me to defend myself.
I mean, geez, it comes down to natural law, Michael. If somebody's going to be violating your natural law, then you have every right to protect yourself.
Of course, I have a right to protect myself.
It's a
I mean,
God-given right. I mean, whether you're religious or not, it's this something that goes beyond even the Constitution, perhaps.
absolutely. Your rights precede the Constitution. They didn't invent freedom of speech when they ratified the First Amendment. They didn't grant you the right to keep and bear arms with the Second Amendment. You had those rights to begin with, and
Yep.
we just happened to put them down on paper.
Michael Badnarik joining us, folks, with the Intel Hub News Brief podcast. And Michael, as a third-party candidate that ran as a libertarian in 2004, if Ron Paul is circumvented from winning the Republican primary, what do you think the chances are that he'll go third party? And if so, what kind of a shakeup will that create?
I have no idea whether Ron will choose a third party bid or not. I have Ron Paul's number in my phone. I could probably call the campaign and talk to him quicker than other people can.
Well,
But
can we
I'm
call him
not.
right now?
No, I won't. No, he's a busy man, and
I believe it. I believe it.
there's nothing that I could do. I mean, if I had information that would propel him to the top of the hill, I certainly would. But um, the best that I can do is to talk to people about him and support his campaign in general. And but I have no way to know whether Ron is interested. Ron is getting a little bit older, and he's been doing this for a long time. And I can tell you from personal experience that running a presidential campaign is exhausting, absolutely exhausting. This man is made of steel simply by virtue of the fact that he's still on his feet and still talking and still doing interviews. Um, at some point in time, just the physical exertion has got to take its toll. And you can run a marathon. You know, I don't know, was it 26 point something miles? But eventually, I mean, if you made it 30, 40, 50 miles, eventually the human body is going to give out and you're just going to collapse. So, Ron Paul may be approaching that point where he's willing to stick it out for this particular campaign session. But if he fails to win the Republican nomination, he may be just tired enough to sit on a park bench and let the rest of us pick up the ball.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. And there's a number of different liberty-minded candidates that are out there besides Ron Paul, too. And he may overshadow some of them with being the center, or not the center so much, but he's in there recently on the lamestream media. But the people like Tisha and others out there running are equally as important to get behind and to pay attention to.
Well, absolutely. And as long as you're mentioning Tisha, I want to let your audience know that I've formally endorsed Tisha Cassida for Congress. Her website is Cassida 2012. That's CASIDA 2012.com.
Very cool. Yeah, and she's going to be coming on my show. I've been meaning to get back to her. Now that I'm back from vacation, I will follow through on that and have her on. So, very cool, Michael. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.